Just a second, please.
Oh.
Okay. Good morning. Today is 24th July, the year 2007. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum along with fellow volunteer Milt Ray. And today we have the honor and the privilege of interviewing Lieutenant John Beirie. John?
Doctor?
Lieutenant Beirie was a TBM torpedo bomber pilot in the Pacific during World War II. So we're going to talk to him about that and a lot of other things. Nice to have you here, John. Okay, now, would you please state your full name and spell it for us, please?
John Beirie, B-I-E-R-I-E.
And when and where were you born?
Was born in Dubuque, Iowa on October 19th, 1922.
Which made you how many years young?
Well, I'll be 85 in October.
Looking good, looking good. So that's where the tall corn grows, I believe.
Yes, a lot of it.
Yeah. And Dubuque, what part of the state is that?
Dubuque is on the eastern edge of Iowa, right at the Mississippi River, about 180 miles west of Chicago.
Okay. And what was your father's name?
My father's name was Ben.
Okay. And what did he do?
He was a railroad engineer back in those days,
Oh.
in the 20s.
What railroad was he with?
He was with the Chicago Great Western Railroad, which is no longer in existence per se. It's been gobbled up by the Illinois Central, I believe it was.
Yeah. And how did his family? How did they end up settling in Iowa? Where did your ancestors on his side all come
My
from?
father and mother both were born and raised in Iowa. My father was raised on a farm out in the middle of the state, out by Waterloo, Iowa. Yeah. And he came onto the railroad, and that's where he met my mother, who was born right in the Dubuque area.
And what was her name and her name?
Her name was named Savage. And so they were married there in Dubuque and lived there and had 5 children. Unfortunately, my father passed away in 1924. He contacted influenza and finally TB. And of course, at that time in 1924, I guess they didn't have too much help for people with TB, and he passed away. So that my mother was left with 5 children and just coming up on the Depression, which wasn't exactly the greatest thing in the world. And I'm sure not too many single men were looking to marry a woman with 5 kids at that time.
What were the names of your siblings?
My oldest sister, Ruth. My brother was next, George. Then my sister, Jane. And all 3 of them have passed away. And then I was the next one. And then my younger sister had just been born, Lois. And unfortunately, she's currently suffering the last stages of Alzheimer's.
I'm going to head on. I'll let Milt take over.
Okay.
But I want you to tell us what it was like growing up during the Depression. And I know kids these days, some of them think, I got it bad. I can't. I only have 3 TVs in our house, things like that. Tell us so they can get a little idea what it was like.
Sure.
What did you do for entertainment during that time as a kid?
Well, of course, living in Iowa, of course, we had the Mississippi River running right by us, so we did a lot of swimming in the summer in there as a kid. And of course, in the winter, we had snow and ice, and so we did a lot of sledding. We didn't have skis, so we didn't do any skiing or anything like that, but we had neighborhood entertainment, you might say.
You created your own lifestyle.
Yeah, we created our own, and of course, being a single mother with 5 children at that time, why nobody had any money, and so all of our gatherings were inter-family, if you will. My one maiden aunt came to live with us old soul never did marry because she raised us while my mother went to work. And,
Were you able to live on your mother's salary, or did the government help you at all? Or?
No, the government didn't do too much that I know of at that time. There wasn't any programs going at that time I don't know of. And so my mother was a bookkeeper, which she had been prior to marriage, and so she became the bookkeeper for a large department store there and worked there the rest of her life until she retired at, I guess, about 70 years old. But as I say, my aunt took care of us, you might say, and brought us up, and my other uncle and aunt were extremely close to us, and he was an employee of the telephone company at that time as a lineman, and so I'm sure they helped us quite a bit too in there because we had a great deal of interplay with family. And then my mother had this home we were living in was one of these row houses there in Dubuque, and so she rented out some rooms to some of the railroad men that my father had worked with, so that was some income there, and that helped us along in that regard. But we wore each other's clothes and that sort of thing, which is probably certainly not per se now. But that's
No,
just,
you know, at that time, you really didn't know any different, so that you were perfectly happy with your situation.
we didn't know we were poor.
No.
Because everybody else around us was too.
When you needed a pair of shoes, it was a big problem.
Oh boy, yes, it sure was.
You put cardboard in the bottom of them.
Yeah.
Anything to exist, but you did what you had to do.
Right.
No, it was a very difficult time. Like I say, not for us really because of the fact we took it as a camp, but for our poor parents that had to support us and bring home the bacon, it was a real tough time for just about everybody in the country.
Well, I'm sure it's not unique to us, but my mother and father had been very devout Catholics,
Mm-hmm.
and they raised us in Catholic faith, and also we went to Catholic grade school and that sort of thing, and of course couldn't afford to go to Catholic high school, but went to the public high schools. But I mean, they gave us a very substantial foundation on what's right and wrong. I had a few times my mother soaked my tongue for what I said.
With an iron hand.
Yes, right.
What about your education later on, as far as high school? Did you go to high school in Dubuque?
Yes, I went to Dubuque Senior High School, and I participated in football and basketball and track. And I was fortunate enough to be the captain of the basketball team, and then I went to Loras College in Dubuque, which happened to be a Catholic college, on a basketball so-called scholarship at that time. They gave us a job, and we were being paid for that job, and supposedly we're going to put half of the pay toward our tuition, but we always talked the business agent out of giving us all the money, so we never did pay them for anything. And I was going 2 years there when the war came along, of course, and so I was interrupted in my education there.
Well, with 2 years of college at that time, then you must have went right into the officer's training.
No, I went right into the Naval Air Corps.
I see.
I enlisted in the Naval Air Corps. I wasn't 21 yet, so my mother had to sign for me, but and so I went up to Minneapolis to Old Chamberlain Airport to be inducted into the Navy, take the physical and all that sort of thing. And so that was in 1942. But I had, prior to that, they had a program which they called Civilian Pilot Training, and one of the places was in Dubuque, Iowa, and as a result, why a friend of mine, he and I decided we'd sign up for that, learn how to fly an airplane, and so we did. And unfortunately for me, I was halfway through the program, and I get a letter from somebody in the government who was running that program had said that I was being disqualified for physical disqualification, and I was about as healthy a guy in the whole world as I knew.
As a ball player.
But the government, of course, don't do anything in one letter. They had to say another letter will follow, so they did. And about a month later, after I was out, the second letter told me I was 2 weeks too young when I went into the program, although I was old enough now, but that made no difference. So anyway, they threw me out, and then after, when I was in my second year in college, then I went into the program again, which now was called War Pilot Training, yeah, WPT. Same place, same airplanes, same instructors, same program. And I went all through that, so when I finished that and I went into the Naval Air Corps program, why, I had probably about 80 hours of flying, which was kind of nice. And so that worked out pretty well.
Well, you were a prima donna when you went in with all that background, because most of your buddies certainly didn't have that kind of a background.
No, and they sent me to pre-flight school down at the University of Iowa. And so I was fortunate to, because I guess I had a couple of years of college and everything, they made me the cadet commander of our group division. And I got to meet some of the officers who were there, who were a lot of athletes from various Midwest universities. And one of them was Dick Fisher, who was an All-American from Ohio State football player. And we got to be pretty good friends there. And so he used to come down and even visit in our quarters there and all that sort of thing. He was our, not only our division officer, he was also our wrestling coach. And that was interesting as all get out, because he had a program in this wrestling where he would line the platoon up half on one side of the mat and the other half on the other side, and you'd have to come in from each end and wrestle. And the guy that was successful had to stay out there and wrestle the next guy. And my misfortune was I was successful in wrestling 3 guys and winning, and so all of a sudden Fisher stopped everything and he came out and he threw me on my back so fast I couldn't hardly know he was there.
Didn't want you to get a big head, huh?
He was a real nice guy though, yeah. And so that was really nice.
That what was your rank at the time that you, I guess, graduated from your training?
Oh, well, we trained, when we got our wings, we became ensigns.
Yeah. What kind of planes did you train on?
Well, from Iowa City, then I went down to Olathe, Kansas, just outside of Kansas City for primary training, and we started our training in like the Yellow Peril Stearmans you have out here in the museum. That was our first aircraft that we flew there, and it was a terrific airplane to fly because it was so great for aerobatics. And so we went all through our primary training in that, after which they sent me down to Pensacola, and I flew in the what do they call that thing, the Wwii vibrator, which was a absolute terrible piece of aircraft. And fortunately that was for a very short period of time, and then we went to our final training in SNJs, or as the Army called it, the AT-6s, and I flew those until we graduated and got our wings. And after that, of course, then we were sent to operational training, which was at Opelika, Florida, just outside of Miami. And we transitioned into fleet aircraft, which in this case happened to be TBM torpedo bombers.
What kind of training did they give you as far as like making landings on a aircraft carrier? I'm sure they did that long before you ever landed on a carrier.
Oh yes, we used to do what they called field carrier landings, and that'd be one of the outlying runways that they would take you out there and they would bring the signal officer, and so you scared all the people in the neighborhoods around there, or they were trying to be out in the country, of course, and but you're just flying, like 100 feet off the ground, and you make your approach just like you were flying into a carrier, and except there were no arresting gear to stop you, but it was just to get the idea of flying that low and that slow with all that power, and then taking the directions from the signal officer and your cuts and wave offs or whatever. So we did that when we got into the TBMs is when we really did that, and from there we went to up to Chicago at the airfield, Naval Air Station just north of Chicago, and that's where we then went out to the two carriers they had sitting out in the Lake Michigan, the Wolverine and the Sable, and that's where we actually made our first carrier landings, and that was just after our graduation and our work at Opelok on the
How did you
TBM.
feel about that? It seemed to me that would be pretty scary to look forward to.
Well, we were young kids. I thought it was great. I really did. I looked forward to it, and fortunately I did, because I made just under 100 combat carrier landings. So I did it fairly well, I guess. Didn't have any problems doing it.
Well, I'm sure you must have. When you finally graduated from your training, what happened then? Where did you go?
Well, I went to Norfolk Naval Air Station, and I was assigned to a composite squadron VC-9, and so we were doing enough. They had been doing an awful lot of anti-submarine warfare in the Atlantic Ocean on the small Kaiser carriers, and VC-9 had been the leading squadron in sinking German submarines at that time. And so we took off from there on the USS Solomons, and of course our people in intelligence or wherever, after having captured the German code machine, were decoding all of these messages that were coming to these submarines, I guess. Of course, we didn't personally know that at the time, but apparently they did, because they, instead of sending us out into the wolf pack in at the North Atlantic, which I was very pleased with because that was a wild place, they suddenly sent us south, and we went way south, and we finally got down off of in the Middle Atlantic, off the coast of South America, and found out later that they were telling us to go after this German submarine 860, and one of our guys apparently ran onto that afternoon, and unfortunately he didn't wait for backup help, and we found out later that he made 4 runs on him, and they shot him down and killed he and his crew on the 4th run. But later that afternoon, why our squadron commander, Howard Avery, spotted that submarine on the surface again. Well, of course, he was calling for backup, one of which was my roommate, Monty Spear, who was interviewed here earlier. And so he called in 2 of the fighter planes, and Monty Spear on a torpedo bomber, and they made coordinated runs on this submarine and sunk it. And I think it was the first time that a submarine had been sunk using aerial rockets. And we carried 6 of those, 3 under each wing, and they fired those rockets into the water I guess it was about 50 or 100 yards abreast of the submarine, and it would then act like a torpedo. And it would just
skip right in.
It would go underwater and just skip right through into the submarine. And of course, with these rockets, they sunk this submarine. We got about 20 or 21 prisoners off of it, one of which was the skipper. And so that's how we found out what the rockets had done. Yeah.
That's interesting. I never heard that story about the rockets actually using them as a torpedo bomber.
I think it was the first time that a submarine had been sunk with them. At least it wasn't our squadron, and our squadron was credited with 9 submarines sunk and 8 possibly sunk. So that was quite a thing they had.
Over a period of time.
Prior to my joining, that was the last submarine we had sunk, and I was not happened to be in the air at the time, and when Monty was in the air, so I wasn't involved with it. But that was the last, and then they ordered us back to Norfolk after that.
And then, what did you do? What was your?
Well, after that, we went down to Boca Chica, Florida, and we were flying in PBY-5As as a co-pilot, training for all-night torpedo attacks using a 1 million candle power light, in which we would come in on radar to the target. When you got to be, I think it was something like 1,000 yards, and you'd be at like 200 feet, why you'd snap on this big light and then home in and drop your torpedo. Fortunately, and then our squadron commander, Howard Avery, he was just all for night flying. I mean, he just loved to get us all night flying. Fortunately, we were recalled to Norfolk. Howard Avery was transferred to another squadron. He took over an all-night torpedo squadron on one of the big carriers, and they put us on a small carrier and sent us to Hawaii to stage for the Pacific fights. And so,
did you fly over to Hawaii, or did you?
No, we took a, I think it was the Wake Island small carrier, went down through the canal, went over to Alameda Naval Air Station in Oakland, parked there for a while, and it was kind of interesting because
about what date would this be now? What?
That would probably be about, let's see, I joined the squadron in January of '43, so I guess this was probably the first part of '44.
Okay.
And kind of an interesting thing there, why, being from Iowa, why we came in under the Golden Gate Bridge and all that stuff, and I'd never seen California before or anything, in San Francisco, and so several of us decided we're going to go and have the night in San Francisco, and of course, being officers, we could leave the ship, and so forth. So away we went, and we had the greatest time you can believe. And so the next morning in the wardroom, one of my fellow officers said, "Well, how did you like San Francisco?" "Oh God," I said, "we had a great time, just wonderful." He says, "How did you go to San Francisco? Did you take the train or did you take the ferry?" I said, "No, we took the tube." He said, "I know you took the tube, but did you take the train and then did you take the ferry?" I says, "I just told you, we took the tube." He says, "You damn fool, you were in Oakland, you weren't in San Francisco." And at that time, Oakland was a real nice city.
Oh yeah.
So we never got to San Francisco, so when we're sailing out of the Golden Gate the next day, why, guys come up and said, "I want you to look, there's San Francisco over there."
Well, they didn't keep you there very long.
No, we were just there overnight.
And so then where did you go? From there to Hawaii?
There we went to Hawaii, to Kaneohe Naval Air Station, the Marine Air Station there, and we...
Where is that in relationship to Hickam Field or the...
Well, Kaneohe is on the opposite side from Honolulu.
Oh,
just
okay.
across the mountain there, the pass and all that sort of thing. And it's in Kaneohe Bay there. And so we trained there for bombing and rocket training and all that sort of thing. And of course they gave us some unusual training there. They gave us low-level training right on the water for evasive tactics. In case one of these Zeros jumped on you, you were going down and practically putting it in the water. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I could see where it could be very exciting when you're that close to the water flying along, and almost any kind of an updraft or downdraft or something, anything could happen,
Yeah.
to really be on your toes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by this time you should have been pretty good at coming in on those carriers.
Oh yeah, because I'd had, I guess, I don't know, 35, 40 landings out in the Atlantic, and of course that water gets pretty wild out there, so it was interesting. But and then we found the Pacific to be a little better, except for the typhoon.
I remember so well in the process of going from one place to the other. These carriers that would always be going along with us, and you would look over and you would see the whole deck of the carrier just like it was perpendicular to the water, and then it would completely disappear. You wouldn't see it at all, and then it would come up again, and then you'd see these guys flying around up there, and you say, how in the world can a guy ever land a plane on something like that? It was a real mystery to those of us that were watching.
Well, we had a rather interesting thing, rather too bad too, but off the coast of South America there, when we were chasing that U-860, we were turning into the wind to launch aircraft, and just then two great big ground swells hit the carrier. Well, of course, the carrier is heeling over to the starboard as you're making this turn into the wind, and those ground swells came from the port, and they just rolled that carrier up. It seemed to me like it went to a 45-degree angle, and I was in the TBM at the time waiting to go up onto the catapult, and boy, thank God they hadn't released the tie downs yet, because boy, that thing was just jerking all over the place. And my turret gunner called on the radio and he said, Mr. Beirie, Mr. Logan just fell over the side on his plane, his fighter fell over the side.
Yeah.
Because these were these little FM2s like we got down below there, that little narrow landing gear, and he fell over onto the smokestack, which of course are right level with the deck, and he was able to squeeze out of it between the smokestack and his cockpit and fall into the water, and so the trailing can picked him up. But yeah, that was something else.
That you mentioned something there that a lot of people don't realize is that they did send minesweepers and destroyers to follow up on our larger aircraft and large groups of ships,
Mm-hmm.
to pick up the fellows that had fallen in the water.
Oh yeah. We always had a rescue. See, we had 4 destroyer escorts with us all the time, and when we were in the Atlantic, we didn't have other ships because it was strictly anti-submarine warfare. And so, of course, whenever you're landing or taking off, always one of those destroyer escorts went to the stern and would be looking for people that might go in the water if they did. And so that kind of a little assurance of things that would work out all right.
A lot of people don't realize that on the ships like I was on that had hundreds of troops that were going to,
yes.
and these guys are just sitting around playing cards and cleaning their guns and telling stories and whatnot. There wasn't a trip that there wasn't 2 or 3 of them would fall overboard. They'd just fall over. They didn't, they get too close to the edge,
Sure.
and the ship would make a lunge, and away they'd go. And they were usually, hopefully, picked up.
Oh, yeah.
If they could swim.
Yeah.
They were supposed to wear life jackets, but they seldom did.
Yeah.
No, that was an everyday occasion with you. I can
yes.
imagine that you
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
get used to that and take it for granted. Okay, now you're in Hawaii, and after your training there, then where did you go?
Well, we were dispatched to Ulithi Anchorage, and that's where we joined Halsey's fleet in preparation for the invasion of Okinawa. And so then prior to the landing on Okinawa, why they sent us up there, and I guess whatever was 3-4 weeks ahead of time, and we did a lot of bombing and rocket work on the gun emplacements and the airfields and so forth in Okinawa. And so we stayed there for the whole campaign then, including the little run with our friend Halsey through the typhoon, which I guess he got roundly criticized.
Well, he was a
Bull.
He lived in his own world. He did what he wanted to do.
Bull Halsey described him very well.
No, I knew him well, not well, but I knew him, introduced to him, and listened to him and the other admirals and generals and whatnot, because I was involved with them in a freakish sort of way. But I really respected the guy. He was a tough son of a gun. Knew exactly what he was going to do, and nobody questioned him. Even the other admirals and generals, they left him alone.
He was like George Patton, I think.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. That he was very direct in what he wanted to do.
Well, if they let those two guys run the war, these other wars, we'd have won them all.
Well,
of course they weren't around.
That's a whole nother story when you start getting into the action of these people who were running things out there, because they really were running things. Washington sent out directives every day, and once in a while they'd look at them. Most of the time, they had already made up their mind what they were going to do.
Get that one lost.
Yeah, and but that's a whole nother story. Well, this. In making runs on the island, then did your ship just go up and park off the island? And
well, yeah, the whole fleet. I guess we were maybe like 100 miles off the island, because obviously they didn't. That was the time when they started sending all the kamikazes down, and so they didn't want us to be sitting there. And I think we had like maybe 1,000 ships, I guess, involved there.
It was unbelievable, you know.
It was just, I couldn't believe how many ships we had. The first day we arrived at Ulithi, Anchorage, we were parked there amongst a bunch of the big carriers and all that sort of thing, and other ships. And that evening, two kamikazes came in and flew right over us and ran. One of them banged into the Franklin, the USS Franklin, which was next to us, and the other one dove into what I thought was a ship, and it ended up being a little atoll. So he was wasted, I guess. And the other guy blew quite a bit of the tail end out of the Franklin, and they had
the Franklin really had a lot of damage done to it during that period.
They were absolutely loading ammo, I understand, at that particular place where the kamikaze went in, and it just blew the hell out of them. But we were up on the deck of our carrier, and all these two planes went whoosh, right over the top of us. Thank God they didn't stop at us.
Well, the carriers were their favorite target.
Oh yeah.
When they would aim in and come in on a fleet, the carriers was the number one target, and of course when they're coming in, you can't tell that. They're coming down.
Where are they going?
And you're wondering where. Well, those of us that were there would look around to see where the carrier was, because we didn't want to be too close to that sucker.
Right.
And 9 out of 10 times, that's where they would go. If they missed the carrier, then they'd pick out whatever was available.
Yeah.
Now, that was a horrible thing to have to live through. Did your the planes on your ship, did you go out and try to shoot these kamikazes down before they?
No. Well, of course, our fighters would, but not our torpedo men.
No.
Unfortunately, one of our torpedo pilots, Pete Hazard, tried to shoot one of them down, and he got knocked off by one of the Zeros, and he and his crew were lost, which was too bad. But he had always wanted to shoot down a damn kamikaze. I don't know why, but anyway, it was just one of those kind of things. But so we were there from the beginning to the end of the Okinawa campaign.
but it was mainly just dive bombing onto.
Well, we got involved in an awful lot of close air support for troops. And fortunately, our squadron had been together for quite some time. And a lot of these squadrons that were coming out were pretty new guys and all that sort of thing. And so our training that we'd had and our time in the Atlantic Ocean for the first cruise, and then all of our training since then, came into pretty good stead for us. And we got so that we were very accurate with our close air support for the troops on the ground. And until I think it was the USS Bennington got it all screwed up somewhere or another, and their squadron dumped a whole bunch of bombs on our own troops, so they backed us off. But we used to be very close to the front lines with our bombs and rockets until that happened.
I wasn't at Okinawa. I was, fortunately, they headed down south at that time, down towards Borneo and whatnot. But several times during the course of the invasions of the different islands, I used to love to watch the Corsairs and the little Wildcats and whatnot make their runs in front of the troops. And of course, when we were making landings, they would usually lay down a bunch of bombs right on top of us, practically, just as we were hitting the beach. They would get there 10 seconds sooner and turn the whole beach into a wall of fire. And the accuracy that they had was unbelievable.
Yeah, we used to have little grid maps, you know, of the island, in Okinawa anyway, and they would have spotters on the ground with the troops, of course, as you probably know better than I, and they would be in communication with us, and they would tell us which grid they wanted us to work in and which space in that grid, and those are small spaces, and they were all numbered and all lettered and all that kind of stuff, as I recall. And so they would tell us what they wanted, rockets or bombs or whatever they wanted, or napalm, whatever you had, and we'd tell them what we had. And so then they'd say, fine, I want you to go to this location and this little grid square, and we want you to do everything there. And as I recall, I believe in some of the instances, the Army or maybe the Marines also used to have little pink flags or something they would lay on the ground, so that if they were that close, you wanted to make sure where they were. And so then you knew, don't, for God's sake, you got to be beyond that to do anything, or you got to bomb your own people, you know.
One of the islands, Saipan, was very similar to Okinawa in the fact that it was really a mountain that came out of the sea. And the Japanese were in all these caves, and so the planes in bombing had to make runs on that mountain and trying to find the openings to those caves. And you could imagine the preparation and the conversation that was going on among the pilots and the planes because of the way they would come in, and it was particularly the Corsairs. They looked like a bird anyhow. And they'd come right straight down on the sides of that mountain and wipe out a opening in a cave somewhere.
You always amazed me prior to the land invasion, when you'd see all these ships out there, those battleships and cruisers and destroyers and everything else firing into the island, you know, and you're making these runs from above, and you wonder someplace where some of those 16-inch shells were flying.
Well, no, it was exciting. You'd look at, there was so much firepower just before the landings that you can't possibly imagine anybody could live through. And of course, when you got there, there was a lot of them lived through it. They were waiting for us.
That's for sure.
But no, that coordination between the planes and the troops on the ground was something that could be watched from the sea because you're
Sure.
on that side of a mountain.
Sure, right.
And it was always very interesting to watch how they would do that. Occasionally they would shoot one of you guys down, and then you would bail out, and here this parachute is coming down, and you know that every Japanese on that island is shooting at that poor guy in that parachute.
That's true.
It
It was always get to the water, get to the water.
yeah,
If you can get to the water, you're probably going to be all right.
yeah, that somebody would pick you up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that how long of a period did that last there in
We were up in
Okinawa?
Okinawa, I think it was a little over 3 months. And so we ended up, as I say, prior to the invasion and all during the land invasion, and until we got hit with that kamikaze, I happened to be off on an airstrike to an airfield that was one of the islands away from Okinawa, and I don't recall what the name of it was, but we were to go over there because they suspected that's where kamikazes might be coming from. And so we were making a strike on the airfield over there. And I guess maybe that might have been where these two guys came from, because when we came back to the ship, we couldn't land because they wouldn't take us aboard our carrier, and we didn't know why, at the time, till finally they shuttled us off to other carriers. And that was when we found out that they'd been hit with this kamikaze. Shot one down, the ship shot one of them down, and this guy got in and dove through the bow, which didn't do much damage, and I think I showed you that picture.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just patched up the hole, and we kept right on operating. 3 hours later, we were firing our first TBM off the catapult.
Oh, the aboard ship they did their own repair then.
Yes, yeah. Unfortunately, only one guy was killed in that whole incident, but it's one of our pilots, Bob Rowe, and this ship's officer were standing. Curiosity kills the cat, I guess. They were up on the forecastle deck, right under where this guy came through, looking at this operation of these people shooting at these kamikazes, and this guy came through. The ship's officer was killed with shrapnel. Our pilot, Bob Rowe, some of the guys ran out there and got him, and they said he looked like a piece of burnt toast. And I had, next I saw him, he looked like one of our spacemen. He was in a full body cast, and they were oiling him, I guess, or whatever, from the burns. And I didn't see him, and I didn't know what happened to him until I guess it was 30 some years later or whatever, I get a letter from him. He's starting up a reunion of the squadron. And he had found out he had gone back to I guess it was the Oak Knoll Naval Hospital or something there in the Bay Area. He'd recovered. He went to the University of California Medical School, became a doctor, and he was down in Madera, California, where he practiced all his life as a doctor, and I was at that time in San Francisco. And so he started our squadron reunions, which I mean, amazing when I got that letter from him.
Most people don't realize that the danger and the damage that the shrapnel does. You're looking at a singular target
That's right.
that everybody's shooting at, but the one thing we used to laugh, and they said everything that goes up comes down.
Right.
And all of the shrapnel that we were shooting up in the air at the kamikazes would come right straight down. And there were, there were many on our ship that were hit in the head, shoulders, and legs and whatnot.
Sure. By show.
With
Right.
the shrapnel
Sure.
that
Well, this ship's officer was, of course, they estimated this kamikaze had a 100-pound bomb on him. And of course, that's what blew the hole in the deck. And of course, just below there, of course, was the anchor windlass. So when he and the bomb went off and hit this thing, I just threw stuff every which way, and most of it went out to sea.
Yeah.
But a piece hit this officer right in the throat, killed him.
Well, that happened more than we know.
Yeah.
Well, then it was almost like every day you get up, go in and find out where you're going to go, and go in and make your run.
Yeah. So yeah, we had a lot of. They used to send destroyers up north of Okinawa as picket destroyers to alert everybody when these kamikazes were coming down. Well, finally somebody said, that's kind of stupid. We don't want to lose a destroyer. Let's send an airplane up there. And I was maybe not the first one, but I was fortunate in our squadron to be the first one that was assigned to go. I think it was something like 60 or 80 miles north of Okinawa, and just fly a course parallel across there, and with our radar, we had radar in the TBM to detect any kamikazes as soon as possible to relay it back to the fleet. Fortunately for my one day up there, nobody came down. So, but it was kind of a lonesome little ride up there, sitting all by yourself, cruising along and with eyeballs as big as saucers, wondering if anybody was going to be coming down, because at that time they were coming down like 100 or 200 at a time. And so I didn't have the opportunity to relay any information of that sort.
That verifies my memories, because I remember so well looking straight up into what little tiny black specks, maybe 50, 60 of them flying around up there. They're beyond the range of our guns on our ship, so you just sit there and look at them.
Yeah.
And they took their time, and so you're sitting and watching them, and they're looking at you, but then finally they would go into their dives.
Yeah, well, they're only going to make one trip, so
Yeah.
I guess they wanted to make it count.
Well, they usually did, from my perspective, really. I can only remember a couple landing in the water. Most of them hit the targets they were aiming at.
Yeah.
And they came in low, too.
Oh, yeah.
They were right on the water when they would come in. And in fact, at some of the islands, they would come in the sun as the sun is setting.
Sure.
Or in the morning when the sun is rising, because you couldn't see them.
Yeah.
And
that was the idea, come in with the sun at your back so that they couldn't see you.
well, that we'd have reports from the radar and whatnot that they were there and they were coming, but you couldn't see them, and that that was exciting.
I used to have, for some reason or other, the skipper, I was always his wingman, and so he always had me doing some odd jobs when they had something coming up. And one of them was when we secured some of the airfields there, Yantan or whatever it was on Okinawa, by the admiral. We were the flagship of the small carriers, and our admiral wanted to go in and talk to whoever it was he was talking to in there, so I'd fly him in. And it was, this one occasion was really something else I'll never forget, because I was just sitting around waiting for him to want to go back, and this Army captain came up to me and he wanted to know if I was going to be doing anything for a while. I said, no, I was waiting for the admiral to take him back to the fleet. He said, would you mind me taking me for a little ride? And I said, no, that's okay, fine, I guess that's okay. So we took off. He was an Army observer, and finally he says, I said, where do you want to go? And he says, I want to go down to Naha Airfield and take a look at Naha Airfield. And I says, what are you talking about? He says, well, I want to fly down that runway and take a look and see what's going on down there. We need to know. I said, that's their airfield, that's not ours. Yeah, I know, that's why I want to go down there. And I'm looking out, and here's all these ships. Now, this is before they got down in the land invasion that far. And, geez, they're firing, all these ships are firing like hell in there, with everything they got. And I thought, how the hell do I get in there without getting shot down by one of our ships, So I went out there where the ships were, and I then paralleled their fire line we went in and we drove right along that runway in Naha Airfield, and all of a sudden I look and here's this big cut in the hill. They had cut so their runway could have been extended, and so we flew right through this, and I thought, geez, if somebody's sitting on that hill, they'll knock us down with a rock, you know. We flew right through that hole, and away we go, and I'm jinking all over the place, and out to the water I get, and wow, great, that's great. He said, boy, that was a great ride. And well, thank you very much. And he says, let's go back the other way. And, well, you're with me, so let's go. So away we went. We went back and down through the hole, and the other way we went. Fortunately, didn't get hit with anything of any consequence, and got him back to the place. Took the Admiral back to the ship. Well, the next time I took the Admiral over was a couple of weeks later, and I was asking about Captain whatever his name was, and the guy said, well, he got killed. So what happened to him? He said, well, he was down at Naha Airfield and they shot him down. I said, oh boy. But young kids, you know.
Oh, sure, you
nobody's
do.
gonna hurt me.
Yeah, you take on anything that comes along.
I can see that ride in my mind so vivid now, it's almost unreal.
Well, one of the sayings in the Navy, we used to laugh about the Army and the Navy Air Corps. They seldom ever flew over us because we'd shoot them down if they got near us, you know. Because those guys on the guns, they shoot at anything they could see up there. They didn't look to see what kind of a plane it was. They didn't know one from the other.
You bet.
So that had to be pretty scary from your point of view, when you fly in over a bunch of ships. All it takes is one of those.
Well, of course, I don't know. Maybe they knew we were coming. I don't know. But of course, we were laying off quite a ways, and they were more close in, doing their bombardments. And I suppose maybe we came in from different directions or something. I'm not sure now at the moment, but the only time I remember all these ships firing was when I was taking this captain on his little ride, and I thought, my God, I would hate to have a 16-inch shell go through my airplane. So they're lobbing them into the shore there.
Now, one of the things I might throw in, this interview is for you, not for me, so we're trying to find out about your experiences, but going in on the landings, these big shells coming in from the big ships, a lot of them didn't blow up.
Yeah, yeah.
And they would just take right off through the island and knock in trees and everything, every which way. And
I guess they found a lot of unexploded ordnance when they got ashore.
And in retrospect, you could see it so clearly. It was like they were going slow.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't think that a big shell going through the air would be going slow enough that you could see it, but you could.
Yeah.
And normally, by the time it would get to the shoreline, it would explode. No, the admiration that at least every Navy man had for the Naval Air Corps was really something. We thought you guys were just the craziest bunch of people in the world, because it was everything you did was very, very dangerous, and it took a tremendous talent to do what you were doing. And
we did. Our biggest problem, of course, if I may interject, was when we had to fly in bad weather. And of course, your airfield is very small, all by itself somewhere, and it could be a little problem because, as you well, you get a lot of haze, fog, stuff like this over the ocean, and sometimes it could be a little hairy finding that little bugger to get home to, and so that was one of the things that always kept you quite alert.
Did they have radar that would help you?
We had radar in our TBMs, and the only time I had any problem with that was when it was one of those kind of days, and I came back to the ship and I couldn't see it. And I asked my radar man where it was, and he mistakenly said to me, "It's 90 degrees," and I thought he said 9 degrees. Instead of saying 90, he should have said that. And he says, and it's 20 miles. okay, fine. It was right ahead of us, 9 degrees. Got to a few minutes, and I said, well, we've gone 20 miles. Where the hell is it now? And he says, I haven't got it, because we went by it. And it was off over here someplace now. So I went into a lost plane procedure, and fortunately on the third leg, why I'm coming back that direction, and he says, I got it on the screw. He says, where is this? He says, it's dead ahead of you, right straight ahead of you, and it's about 35 miles, because we'd gone out this way. Fine. And so when we got back, I said to him, where was it the first time you saw that? He says, it was 90 degrees. I says, you said 90? You didn't say 90, did you? No. I says, don't you ever do that to me again. Because I thought you said 9. And I said, that's why. We could have just turned there it was, you know. Anyway, we survived that. But that was one of the things that when they got that kind of haze or whatever it was on the ocean, you couldn't see anything for anywhere. And so it was always kind of nice. The fighters would always jump in beside us. And we have our radar on and take them back to the ship.
Oh, really?
Because they didn't have any, of course.
That's interesting.
Oh, yeah.
We have a picture of your plane beside you here. Let me move the camera a little bit. Maybe we can pick it up. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, the TBM made by General Motors, TBF made by Grumman, of course, the original. And it was a fantastic aircraft, I thought, because it was so stable. And it had a crew of 3, the pilot, turret gunner, and your radio man in the belly. And we could carry a 2,000-pound torpedo in the bomb bay, or 400 or 500-pound bombs. We always had 3 rockets under each wing, and of course you had 50 caliber guns in the wings, and it could take an awful lot of punishment too. Even carrier landings weren't the easiest thing on aircraft, as you very well may know, and especially when we were in the Atlantic and you'd have some of the real wild water that they'd come up with. Some of these, most people don't realize that aircraft carriers aren't just to sit flat in the water. They're going up and pitching forward, and they're also sliding a little bit sideways. And so that's why the signal officer always tried to get you so that the carrier wasn't coming up and you're coming down. It was a little bit hard on the planes that way. But this plane would take an awful lot of damage like that, and it was excellent for what we considered glide bombing, not dive bombing, but glide bombing. The dive bombers were coming down about 70 degrees. We were coming about 35 to 40, and we could put bombs and rockets in good tight positions because of the stability of that aircraft. It had an autopilot in it too, you know, and so as a result, when you're on anti-submarine patrol, you just put it on autopilot so you could just look out all the time. So you didn't have to be flying the airplane then, see. So this was quite a machine. I'm telling you, it replaced the old TBD Douglas, you know, that got shot down with Torpedo 8, you know. And this was much better because it was faster. You could drop your torpedoes, which fortunately I never had to do. Thank God.
Was the torpedo hanging on the outside?
It was in the bomb bay.
Inside.
Inside.
Open up the bomb bay and.
Yeah. So were your bombs. They were inside, and you would have to open the bomb bay just like another bomber would.
You mentioned your radar man was down inside.
Yeah. Yeah. He was inside. Had all the radar gear was in here between the pilot and the turret gunner. Radio and radar gear was all in here, and his screen was down there, and he had a bench seat there, and a little 30 caliber pea shooter, we called it, out the bottom here. I don't know if he ever fired it, but or if he did just for the hell of it, I guess.
Well, it was a pretty good little gun. I had 2 of them.
Oh, did you?
On the back of my boat.
Yeah, and so as a result, this became a very, very good aircraft for close air support for troops, because you really had a stable platform, and it was had a lot of power. I mean, it was 1,900, 2,000 horsepower in it. We totally loaded it, came up to about 19,000 pounds, which is nothing anymore, but we were making actual deck takeoffs from our small carriers to begin with, but we lost a couple of aircraft that didn't get off the into the air, so they finally decided catapult was the only way.
How did you control your rockets? In other words, you're coming in and they're out there on your wings. Once you
We had a gun sight right here. Had a gun sight right there would light up, and it was also for the trace for your 50 caliber guns.
mm-hmm.
And so, of course, from our practice, we knew that the rockets would be arching, and so you took that into consideration and you didn't fire them from too far away. You went pretty low to fire those things.
Did you really make an attempt to hold the aircraft steady when
Yes.
when you shot them off?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. You weren't flopping around.
Okay.
Really. No, you were going very steady. That's why I say it was a good platform. Of course, it was also a good target.
Yeah, I've got a good story I'll tell you later, but the rockets were so powerful but difficult to control by most of the people that used them out there, particularly in the Navy, where off of ships. But they were very powerful.
Well, I'll tell you an unusual one, if you don't mind.
No.
In regard to a TBM, we always used to, I guess you never got tired of watching people make carrier landings, even as pilots. And several of us were up on our deck watching the carrier next to us take in its last few aircraft, and it was just becoming dusk. And this TBM, the last one, was making the approach on this carrier next to us. And the thing is, the rocket button was on top of your throttle, but you had to put a safety plug in to make it fire. Well, apparently he still had the safety plug in this thing. So here he comes along, and we can picture this ourselves. When the signal officer gave him the cut to land, he pulled the throttle back and punched this button on top, and 2 rockets went flying right up over the carrier and into the water in front of the carrier. And we kept thinking what the captain might have done to him when he got him out of that aircraft, because that must have been the scariest thing in the world for anybody on the ship that saw all of a sudden, here these 2 rockets, or 6 or whatever it was that went off, come right up over the top of the carrier.
I'm surprised it didn't hit the carrier.
Didn't hit the bridge or anything, because he was coming straight in and it arched. He was in a nose-high attitude, so it arched. We could just see them going up like this and boom into the water, and I thought, oh dear, I'm glad that's not me.
Well, the mistakes that were made, and nobody likes to think about them.
That's right.
But they were everyday human mistakes. People didn't do them on purpose, of course, but it got pretty scary out there, because you never knew for sure exactly what was going to happen because of the mistakes.
That's right.
That were just a normal thing to happen. Well, it's a beautiful plane, and that was your baby through most of your time. And
yeah, I just flew the FM2 a little bit and the F6F a little bit, but the first time I flew the FM2, I took off the carrier. I had never flown it before, and they said, well, they wanted me to take this carrier thing. So I took off. Unfortunately, I found out later that the deck crew, the plane captain or somebody, had not put the oil cap back on the oil tank. And the skipper flew upside me with a TBM, and he looked over, and this oil is streaming out of the plane. And I looked down and I went to pull out my chartboard, and hell, there's oil on it. And I looked down and there's oil in the cockpit. So he takes me, he said, get back to the carrier. So I went back to the carrier and brought it aboard. And the funny part was that the skipper of the ship was a kind of a nervous fellow, Captain Christ. And I found out later he had made an announcement on the loudspeaker that all unnecessary personnel were to lay below, because this pilot had never landed this type of aircraft on a carrier before. But it was so much easier than flying the TBM. I mean, the fighter plane so responsive that I had no problem at all. I just came in and landed, then discovered that here's all this oil streaming around.
That could have, I guess it could have caught fire very easily.
Well, it could have conked out the motor, could have overheated, you know, because your oil pressure will drop and you'd freeze. There you are in the water. I didn't ever hear what they said or did to the plane captain, but...
Well, it's human error, you know.
Yeah.
They do it 100 times and do it right every time, and then that one time.
Yeah, after that they let me fly the FM2 quite often if I wanted to, because they felt, well, that's as good an experience to take out the first flight.
On making runs on the islands, particularly in Okinawa, where you've had a mountain to contend with, did they send you in to pick out the caves where these people were half buried, but their guns are sticking out?
We didn't know what was on the ground. All we knew was they gave us our assignment on these grids and the little square on the grid. And now what that was, we didn't really know. And it could have been a gun emplacement, it could have been a cave, I don't know, we don't know. I mean, and in retrospect, I probably forgot anyway, but like I say, we were just assigned to a very small piece.
I was just wondering how much you could visually see yourself when you made your run.
Well, you could see everything, I mean, all sorts of things, but of course your concentration was not so much on what you saw down there, but what you were going to put down there.
Yeah.
And make sure you were lined up correctly and all that sort of thing. If you were looking through a gun sight or anything like that, well, of course, it was superfluous what was down there. You would just concentrated on that particular area because that's where they told you to go. And of course, trying to keep out of the way of anti-aircraft fire and so forth like that before you made your dive.
Well, you were responsible for most of the damage that was done to the enemy. The troops on the ground could only shoot at what that was right in front of them.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, from the Japanese point of view, you kept them from operating. You destroyed their water, you destroyed their food, they couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't do anything. Every time they'd stick their nose outside of their cave they were in, here would be an aircraft coming in and wiping them out.
Yeah. Especially in the south part of the island there, they got pretty thick down there, and you know, from Naha south, because they were finally getting pushed right off of the island. But, we used to, after our runs a lot of time, when we would be taking off, going back to the fleet, why we would on occasion see maybe a couple of tanks or a couple of trucks or something like that on a road, but of course we didn't have any more armament, so there was no point in fiddling around with that. But it was kind of interesting, you know, to see them scurrying around trying to get into trees and all that sort of things. I was glad I wasn't on the ground.
Well, the guys on the ground were glad they were not where you were too, because they could see the flak going up.
Yeah, I guess it's one or another.
No, I wrote a book and I call it War is Hell, because no matter how you slice it, it's a pretty terrible thing, terrible thing.
Well, I'd always been interested in naval aviation because the older brother of one of my good friends was in the Naval Air Corps program at the time, and ended up flying PBYs when he graduated. And my friend, his younger brother, went into the Naval Air Corps as well. He and I were in those civilian flying programs together. And he went into F6Fs when he was assigned, and unfortunately was killed in the Marianas turkey shoot deal there. They don't know what happened to him. They were successful on all their run that they'd had, from what I understand, and they were coming back, and you know what we used to do in fighter planes, what they call chasing tails, just for the hell of it, you know, it'd get kind of fun. And the leader would start doing something, he'd do a slow roll or something, and everybody would slow roll right after him, you know, like that. And then the next thing you know, he'd go up into a loop, and you'd all go up into a loop after him. And they called this chasing tails. And so he'd do whatever he wanted, the guy in the lead, and you just automatically follow him. And it was kind of easy to do, because it was amazing how you learned how to fly an airplane after a while, that you just automatically did things, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
And it was like learning to
You
walk.
become part of the plane.
That's right. And they say that unfortunately he was tail end Charlie on this, and of course that gets you, it's like a whip, you know. You're on the tail, and apparently they think he just went into water. They don't think he was shot down or anything, but anyway, he never got back to the carrier, and so that was the end of Jack Thill, but he was a good friend of mine, and that was unfortunate. But there were an awful lot of operational accidents. We had them too, so.
Were you down in the turkey shoot when that was going?
That was before we got there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, some of our, well, the only real bad time we had in losing personnel was on that submarine, U-860, and they shot down, I think it was 3 aircraft.
Really?
Yeah, and it's too bad, because you
They
had
have,
2 EMs, you know, you
they
got
have
3
a
people.
5-inch gun on the submarine, or machine guns? Or?
I'm not sure what they have on submarines, 3-inch or 5-inch or
I
whatever.
think probably a 3-inch, and probably some 50 calibers, too.
And so that's why we always had the fighters go in to silence the guns if you could, to at least give you a little time to make an appropriate run, because when you were attacking submarines, we have pictures of some of our guys from their gun cameras, and you know, the submarine is right there. You're right on top of it. When you're dropping depth charges or anything like that, or bombs, you're right on top of them. And so if they get back to the guns,
they can hardly miss you.
You're not in the best position to evade it.
You're a big target.
That's right. So anyway, we lost several guys on operational accidents that way, and then we had even one guy on night catapult launches were very dangerous, because we had what they called a holdback ring, and they would attach this thing to the tail of your plane and to the catapult, and they had this little ring that was between them, and it was designed apparently for a certain tensile strength, and if it exceeded that tensile strength, it broke. Well, not everything is made according to specifications, I guess. And of course at night there's no lights going on, and the carrier, and you're sitting on the catapult full throttle, full low pitch, and it's shaking like a cat passing tacks, you know, and all of a sudden that holdback ring that breaks, you don't know it, you just start taxiing forward, and you only got 90 feet, and you taxi right off the front end. We had I know we had one guy do that one night, and he was one of the guys that was so conscious of safety, it was almost a sin, because he was constantly talking about safety this, safety that, safety this, be sure to, and he taxied right off the front end of the carrier, and then of course the carrier runs over.
Back up for a second and explain that catapult. I would assume they've got something connected to your plane, and you're gunning the engine, and then they let you go. Is that?
Well, you see, what they do is they bring you up on the catapult, they hook up the front to the catapult, and then they're going to hook up the back to the catapult. Because when you got to have something to hold you back when you go into full power. And so what they do is they take this thing and they come up to hook it onto your plane, and they have a ring. They called it a holdback ring. And it was, as I say, designed and built with a certain tensile strength that could withstand. And so that when they hit the catapult, it would break. Well, if it wasn't quite up to it, when you hit full power, it could break. And of course, at night, like I say, it's dark. You don't have any lights around. The only guy you got is this guy down here. He's got a little flashlight, and he ain't doing anything right at the moment. So you're busy what you're doing, and you haven't given him the signal that you're all set. And all of a sudden, that holdback rings, but the plane is shaking like hell. I mean, because of that power, you know,
Yeah.
you're just sitting there, boom, 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 and all of a sudden, it just starts walking up forward, and boom, off it goes. You only go, like I say, 90 feet. And if that holdback ring breaks and you don't know that, there you go, and then the ship runs over you.
I didn't know that. I didn't know they had a holdback type.
In those catapults, I don't know what they have now, but of course now the newest thing is going to be, instead of steam or hydraulic, it's going to be electric catapults.
Oh, really?
And we had hydraulic, you see. Now they have steam. But yeah, it was one of those things that you always wanted to make sure you could see that guy over on the deck that was giving you the signals to go, you know. Because if he disappeared, he's under your wing and you're moving.
Yeah.
But if you got your head in the cockpit doing something else at the moment, why, maybe you didn't see that.
Okay, how long were you there at Okinawa? Was that was your main objective and your main experience as far as dealing with the Japanese?
Yes. We were just a little over, I think it was 3 months, 3 weeks or something like that. Not
Yeah.
quite 4 months, whatever it was.
Then what did you do?
Well, then after we got hit with that kamikaze, we operated for about 2 more weeks because we could still fly off the catapult. And they patched up the deck and everything. So then they finally said, well, go on back for repairs. And so we went back to Honolulu, and we got onto some little carrier that was transferring personnel back to the States. And we went back to Alameda, and I got orders to go on leave for 30 days. And so I went home, and my orders were then to proceed to Naval Air Station Pensacola as an instructor. And so I was a fighter instructor at Pensacola until I got discharged. Well, we didn't get discharged, we got a certificate of satisfactory service, which was kind of interesting because
I'd never heard of that.
in the Navy, you never got a discharge. You got a certificate of satisfactory service, so they could pull you back next week if
Oh,
they
that's
wanted.
right. Yeah, you were an officer.
Yeah, and so, but the way I went home, went to school and so forth, but I was an instructor down there until I got
Well,
discharged.
you had gone up a little bit in rank along the way there somewhere. You
Well, I
started
was-
out as an ensign, and
I was just going to be promoted to full lieutenant, and I went home. So I never quite got that second strike, but I was a JG, I mean, the exalted rank of JG, as they say. And, but anyway, I was married at the time, and my wife was very adamant about me getting out, which was a mistake on my part there, I think, but that happened.
well, you went home and had your 30-day leave. Is that when you picked up a wife to go along with your
No,
program?
I got married right after I got my wings, unfortunately.
Oh, before you left.
Yes, unfortunately, and it didn't work out in the long run, but that's the way that goes. But anyway,
You mean the marriage didn't work out?
No,
Well, that was a standard course of action too.
yeah. But I went down to Pensacola, and I went through instructor school, and a good friend of mine that had been in the squadron with me, he came down there and went through instructor school too, and so I finally went out to one of their advanced bases, and I was fighter gunnery instructor in SNJs. And so just before these guys graduated, why we would give them their last instructions and all that sort of thing. So it worked out all right. So then I got my numbers all together and got my certificate of satisfactory service and went home and went back to college.
The war's over now.
The war is over because it ended while I was home. Is when the Japanese surrendered on August 15th, I believe that was.
Mm-hmm.
And I had not yet reported to Pensacola yet. So like I say, when I got home, I went to school, and I finally ran out of money. And so I left school, and I left college, and I got a job for a corn wet milling company in Clinton, Iowa, which was just about 60 miles from Dubuque. And I went down there and went to work for those guys, and finally they had some program there where it was from the International School of International Correspondence School or something like that. And so they said, well, you ought to take this course in that. So I took this course and found out after I finished it, why I was the only one in the company that ever finished it. So anyway, their director of technical service, Dr. John Newton, he was overlooking all this stuff, and so he said I had gone to Iowa State University out at Ames, Iowa, and he had got his PhD at Ames, Iowa. And of course, he was all hot to trot for me to go back and finish school.
Yeah.
And so I looked into it, and I said, no, Doc, I can't do it because these guys want me to come back for 2 years. And I says, I don't need that much time, but that's what the Ames is saying. And I says, I can't afford it. And so I went back to Loras College and talked to them, and they said, yeah, well, you come for a 6-week summer session, and you take 1 semester, and you'll have enough of the credits that you need to graduate. And so that's what I did. And I had, in the meantime, taken some correspondence from the Extension Division of the University of Iowa, and to get some credits on languages and stuff like that I really didn't care too much about, but had to have.
Qualified to graduate.
Yeah. So anyway, I finally got that through, and when I came back to Clinton, Iowa, to Doc Newton, he said, I want you to go into the research department. And so I went in there, and then he dragged me out of there and put me in charge of their technical service department, and I used to go out with some of their technicians that were working on various problems with, because we did a lot of business with the food industry and with the industrial industry and so forth like that. And so I got a lot of experience talking with those guys and watching them, what they were doing and so forth. So finally he says to me that they wanted me to go into the sales department. And so I said, well, that's fine. Where do they want me to go? And he says, well, they've got 2 openings. One is Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the other is San Francisco. And I said, no, you only have one, and it's not Milwaukee. I have nothing to do in Milwaukee. So they sent me out to San Francisco, and so I was there for 2 years. And then they were having a little problem up in the Seattle area with the guy they had up there. So they, like they say in the government, you don't fire somebody, you send him off to another job or something. So they sent him back to where he was before in Minneapolis, and I went up to the Northwest and took over there. And finally they decided I would come back to San Francisco after 6 or 8 years up there. And then they had our Western sales manager retire, and I took over his job. And so I was fortunate to be able to do quite a few things there. And then they came out with a new product, which was replacing all the liquid sugar, like in soft drinks and fruit canning and all of that sort of thing. Wherever liquid sugar was used, this new high fructose corn syrup. And so I was fortunate to be doing some pretty good work with that. And one of their competitors then came along and wanted me to represent them as a broker. was Archer Daniels Midland ADM, and they were just getting into that sort of thing. So I resigned from Clinton Corn Processing and started my own brokerage firm, representing ADM, and really got some huge accounts that they were really pleased with, except for one of their vice presidents who got a little twisted out of shape because I was making too much money. And
That happens to brokers.
yeah, and so I told him, I said, hell, I'm only making 15 cents a hundredweight. What are you talking about? And so the more I sell, the more money I get, and the more money you get. So what are your problem? Oh, geez, they're really hollering about the money you're making here. And I says, I can't believe that. I just got a letter from the president saying he's so glad I'm doing all this because they're making more money. So finally, I got a little fed up with that one, and so I resigned from my brokerage firm and went to work as the president for one of my customers who was in that business of blending sweeteners and so forth. Well, ADM decided that they would cancel my brokerage thing, and I said, you can't do that. Nothing says I have to be there. So we get into a lawsuit, and they finally settled out of court, which nobody could believe that that I defeated ADM in a court of law. So anyway, I was working with this company then, and we were doing a lot of business with ADM and all that kind of stuff. And so finally I got a call from one of their new vice presidents of ADM, and he came out and wanted to have dinner with me because he wanted me to leave the company that I was with and come back and take over for ADM. I told him, I said, well, I really don't think I can do that at the moment, but I said, I appreciate you coming along there. Well, anyway, I ended up being sort of the cushion between these two guys that owned this little company that I was president of, the owners, and I finally told them, I'm out of here, I'm gone, I'm not gonna sit here and have bang between the two of you guys. So I called up my friend at ADM, and he says, come on, we'll take you back. So they took me back, and I
Well, you've had a very interesting career.
Mm-hmm.
This tape is supposed to last an hour, and according to what I see on here, we've got a 1.02.
We ran over a bit.
I think so, but I'm not hearing. Here he is.
I'm thinking, okay, you're still going over there though, so.
Oh, are we still going okay?
Yeah, on that one, but we'll stop this for a second. It's just, have you changed tape?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay.
That's.
All right. We'll stop and change this here. How you guys doing?
Well, we had a nice visit.
Yeah.
You've got
Two Navy men, what do you mean?
you got about 40 minutes left on the DVD, so. So you only went 20 minutes over.
Oh. Well, I was looking at the timing in here, and it was 1.02, so I figured that'd come to the end of an hour.
You're right.
But I guess that's when it stopped.
Yeah, it didn't fit for a while.
Okay. I'm just learning this. He's the grandfather here, taking care of me.
Sure.
Okay, you're gone. So, but check it in about 30 minutes because I don't want to lose
Well,
it on that.
I believe we're just about
Okay.
covered the waterfront here, unless there's some area that you can think of.
No, well, I was living in the Bay Area, and I finally moved over into the East Bay Area, and one of their nice golf courses over there, and we've been coming down to the desert here for quite a while, and we have a timeshare with Marriott over here.
Mm-hmm.
We were using that, and then when we moved down here, of course, we now use that for exchanges
Sure.
all over in Hawaii, and we've used it in Florida and various places around.
You live here in Palm Springs?
We live in Indian Wells,
Indian Wells.
and we first lived in Indian Ridge Country Club, and then my wife wasn't too happy with that because of the homeowners association situation, and so I wanted to move out to PGA West with all the golf courses, so we moved out there, and ended up that that wasn't the ideal spot either because of again the homeowners association and the gardener situation and all that's in a gated community, and so we finally bought a home in a neighborhood, a brand new home in a neighborhood in Indian Wells, and we've been in there a little over 2 years, and so it's working out very nicely. So we now have been traveling around, as they say, using our timeshare in various different places and all that kind of good stuff, taking a lot of cruises and whatever. And so,
Enjoying your retirement.
oh yeah, my wife's still working. She's the recipient of a family trust, and so she's the trustee, and she and her daughter are co-trustees now, and so they run these properties we have in San Francisco up there, which is not the easiest place to work with
No.
properties, and but anyway, it's a very lucrative situation, no question about that, and so you kind of swallow hard once in a while.
Well, this family trust is it's
her
your
family.
trust, or her trust.
Her family trust, yeah. Her grandfather set it up, and she's the last of the recipients of the trust. And she's all the rest of them have passed away, and so.
Well, she's in command of the action then.
Oh yeah, very much so. Has been for the last about 26 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's excellent.
Yeah, and so and during that period, why her cousins have all passed away from various unfortunate situations. But
They remind us that time is going by rapidly.
yes, it is. That's true. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, do you have children? We didn't talk about your children.
No, I have one daughter, and my wife has one daughter, and there's not much I can say about my daughter because we have no contact, but her daughter has been an excellent individual, and the two grandchildren have been very close to me, and so we see them all the time, and they live up in the Bay Area.
Uh-huh.
But my daughter elected to go other directions, and so.
That happens.
Yes.
That happens more than we think.
So I've said, fine, that's the way you want it, that's the way it'll be, so that's too bad.
It is too bad. Does she have children?
Yes, yes, she does. And for some reason or another, we had set up quite a fund for her and her children. We had, she and her husband had got a divorce, and that was before my wife and I were married, and so I cashed her husband out of their home so that she wouldn't have to move the children, and all that. They were back in the Midwest at the time, and bought her a new car and bought her new furniture, and then Barbara and I were married, and we set up a college fund for her, and unfortunately she spent all the money, and the kids.
Well, those interfamily things can be very, very difficult, and very, very disappointing.
Well, life goes on, you know, and
It does.
that's the way that goes, and so if she doesn't have, we have no contact from her children or anything of the sort, so.
Well, it could still change,
Well,
but probably not.
I don't think it will, because it's been so long now, it's been probably 20 years.
Yeah. Well, that's too bad. You might make an effort just for the fun of it sometime, and see what happens.
Yeah, and we have a very nice relationship with her daughter and the grandchildren and all that sort of thing, and so that works out real well. And we've done quite a number of things for them, so that we feel that.
You like it
Some
better
is-
here than up in San Francisco?
Oh, much, yeah. It's so crowded up there now, and it's
My
San
son-
Francisco used to be so nice, and it's now such a dirty city, and it's just.
My son lives in Palo Alto, and
Oh, well,
they
that's not so
just
bad.
want us to come up in that area so bad. I said we'd be near them.
Well, Palo Alto is different than San Francisco by
Yeah.
a long shot.
Yeah, that's true.
You get down to Los Gatos and Palo Alto and all those places out in there, well, you've got some really nice places, but the city, and the politicians now in the city have just destroyed it. I mean, they're welcoming every bum in the world come in. So
Yeah.
And most of them are bums too, so it's one of a kind, I guess.
No, it's pretty hard to beat where we are right now and here in this Coachella Valley is one of the prime places in the world.
Well, we've moved into this neighborhood in Indian Wells. It's Blackfoot Way. It's only 1 block long, and the neighbors are just great people. And there's no homeowners association, and we have our own gardeners and things of this sort. And so, and we can play golf at the golf courses they have at the resort there for $35, being residents.
Can't beat that.
Now, of course, they're just completing the second renovation of the second course there and the new clubhouse and all, but this fall all that'll be open, and so we'll be back and working on it again.
Well, you're living the good life.
Well, it's
You worked hard, and you don't have to back up to anybody.
No, I don't think so. We're enjoying ourselves and enjoying fairly good health, which is not all bad at our age. And my wife, of course, is considerably younger than I am, but
Just for the record, how old are you right now?
I'll be 85 in October.
85.
My wife is going to be in September. She'll be 70. So I married a child bride.
Hey, that's all right.
Yeah. And she has a job.
Just as a joke, my wife was complaining last night about her legs, and she was having all these problems. And I said, well, my problem is I should have married a woman 10 or 15 years younger than I am, and I wouldn't have all these problems of trying to cope with you. She didn't think that was too wise. Yeah,
No,
she said, I can see you with some young broad.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Well, we enjoy, going out to dinners, and I'm a member of the Palm Springs Corvette Club. I used to have a '74 Corvette years ago, and
The little bathtub?
and my ex-wife drove off in that. So one day my wife said to me, "What would you like for Christmas?" My current wife, and I said, "Well, I don't need anything for Christmas." Oh, he says, "You want something, you gotta have something for Christmas." I said, "Well, what the hell would I have?" And she says, "Well, think of something." And I said, "Oh yeah, I'd like to have a Corvette." She says, "You had one, what do you mean you've always wanted one?" I says, "Yeah, I've always wanted to have a Corvette." She says, "Well, why didn't you get one?" I says, "It's not exactly nothing." And so anyway, I got a Corvette, so I got a 2001 convertible. So we joined the Palm Springs Corvette Club. It's a
That knocks about 10 years off your life right there.
Right.
You're a kid again.
So we do an awful lot. That's a very active group. We make a lot of trips around and all that stuff, day trips and weekend trips and all that sort of thing. And we we're up at 4th of July we always go up to the Idlewild 4th of July parade. We have about 20 Corvettes go up there, and we decorate them all up, and we throw candy to the kids in the parade and all that sort of thing. So it's a very active group.
I had my early days, my first career was in custom cars,
Oh,
and one of the fellows working for me picked up a little Corvette that was in pretty bad shape. The little first ones, the little bathtub jobs, were really cute, and he worked on that till
53 or 4 or something like that.
He worked on that day and night till it was like brand new. It looked like it was sitting right on the showroom floor. And then somebody stole it,
Oh.
and they went out and they just smashed it up, and they
Oh dear.
burned up the engine, everything. He just gave up. That was the end of it. He went into 40 Fords. That was his next thing.
Yeah.
But that little Corvette was one of the most beautiful little cars you've ever seen.
We have about 150 members here.
Oh, really?
And well, we have actually 96 Corvettes, and with wives and girlfriends and so forth, our membership is about 150. So we have a dinner night out every month. Like we're going to be Thursday night, we'll be having dinner at the Red Tomato up here. We'll be about 40 or so of us go to the dinner, and so we do that in different restaurants every month. And then I'm a member out at the Living Desert. We're model railroaders, and I've been working on that model railroad out there for about the last 6 years. And then with, of course, the volunteer here with the Air Museum. I don't have time to have a job anymore.
No, you're a busy man.
So I have about 200 feet of track in my backyard, and I have a lot of model railroad equipment. I've been picking it up for years, and my wife says you got about $40,000 or $50,000 worth of it out there in the garage.
Yeah, that can happen easily.
So I finally got 200 feet of track out in my yard this last year, and so we run the trains out there, not in this hot weather, but cooler weather. It's a lot of fun. People over there always mystified that somebody's got a train in their backyard.
Oh, that's a great hobby.
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
Yeah, we used to travel all over the world with LGB is an outfit that makes it's almost defunct now, unfortunately, because the parents retired and the two sons ran it right into the ground, and all their stuff was made in Nuremberg, Germany. Just absolutely fabulous stuff. And that's most of the stuff I have. And but we used to belong to the LGB Model Railroad Club, and they had tours that we would go to in Europe and ride all the trains and so forth around in Germany and Switzerland and France.
One of the fellows here, I want to say Bill Newland or Newman, was a model train man. He had the kind you could sit on. And
oh no, mine are just like the Isle of the Living Desert. The engines are about this long.
Yeah,
so
well,
that type of thing. But they're all replicas of actual equipment that has been or is in existence now or whatever. So it's all very authentic stuff and rather expensive. Get engines up that cost you around $1,500–$1,600.
Oh, yeah.
So it's good stuff.
prior to the war, I worked at the Union Station in Los Angeles.
Oh, did you?
Unloading freight cars and
Yeah.
unloading the passenger cars and the old Los Angeles Banana and all of those trains. And of course, they all came in. Everybody, that was your way of getting around in those days.
Yeah.
And so I have a little thing in my heart when I see these miniature railroads and whatnot. I see those trains. I say, I remember that one, and I remember that one.
We have taken several trips up to Seattle on the Coast Starlight, and that's a beautiful train, at least when we were taking it anyway. And we made the mistake of taking it from Los Angeles all the way to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, during the summer, and it was loaded with little kids who were apparently riding for free or something, I guess. And they just invaded the train. Didn't make any difference what class of car they were in. They were all over the train. And so we haven't taken any since that time.
We talked about taking the train up north, up into Vamp and up in that area.
Yeah.
Could be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, we one time had our squadron reunion in Portland, and so Barbara and I drove up to Vancouver and took the Rocky Mountaineer over to Banff, and stayed there for a few days. And it stops up at Tillamook. No, not Tillamook. It's someplace halfway between. You go to a hotel, then you get back on the train and go on to Banff, and then we took a sightseeing tour in a bus up through Lake Louise and up to Jasper, and then we caught the Continental train coming back to Vancouver from the East Coast and rode that back. And so
That was a beautiful trip.
it was really a great, and that Rocky Mountaineer is a fabulous ride, just really and they had tremendous people giving you the information on each of the cars that you were in, and very comfortable cars. It was an excellent trip. I would recommend that Rocky Mountaineer to anybody. It's just a great trip. Yeah. Only trouble with that was I left my car in the parking lot at the Holiday Inn in Vancouver, and the guy that was in charge of it made the mistake of putting on the windshield when I was coming back. I had prepaid him for the storage, So somebody broke the back windows thinking they could get something out of the inside, and they were smart enough not to open the doors where their alarm would have gone off. And anyway, they broke the back windows out of my car and got nothing out of it because I didn't have anything really in there, but I had an awful lot of stuff in the trunk. So they didn't get in.
Well, those kids looking for fast dollar.
Well, they said that there were 4 cars broken in that one night in that house, and it's in a closed garage.
Oh,
The
they'll
guy
get
made
it.
he put the sign on this return on such and such a date. They know you're not going to be there. Who's to bother you? Anyway,
You know, when we take trips at home and we go to all the trouble of stopping the papers and
yeah.
we're telling everybody in the world that we're gone. Come on in, the place is yours, you know.
Yeah.
Well, golly, John, it's been nice talking with you. When we think of World War II, we think of the guys that did the job, and we call them heroes. And you're one of them.
Well,
You can be very proud of your experience and your background, and our country went through a terrible experience, but it was people like you that made it possible for us to straighten the Japanese out, send them back home.
Well, we have the Americans have a unique way of doing things. They defeat the Germans and then they rebuild them. They defeat the Japanese and then they rebuild them. And I suppose we are doing mostly everything in Korea that we can, and also Vietnam. And I suppose we will in the Middle East too.
Yeah, well, we're almost doing it in Iraq right now.
Yeah.
We're setting up their whole government for them.
I'm not so sure how much thanks we get for it, but
no,
that's the way
we won't
that
give you
goes.
thanks.
I'm not ashamed that we do these things. I think I'm rather proud of the fact that America does these things, and I can't think of any other country that would do as much as we do. So, of course, being in the Navy, I don't know. Maybe we Navy folks are a little different breed of cat, because I think of the Navy as being one of the finest trainings that I've ever had in my whole life.
Yeah.
And I just enjoy watching any of these things on television that relate to the military, but primarily to the Navy, because they're still doing an awful lot of good things for the world.
I know that I wasn't as fortunate as you, because I quit high school and went in the Navy,
Mm-hmm.
and when the war was over, of course, I finally made it home, and then went out and found a job, went to work. But I've always said that the experience I had in that 3 years in the Navy would every bit as good as if I had spent 3 years in college.
Probably better.
Or better, you know.
Of course, I was a little slow. It took me 12 years to get through college, but
Well,
a lot of things in between.
you did it right. It was all in timing and opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Well, there was a feeling at that time that was different than it is today. And when this thing happened at Pearl Harbor, why, everybody was lined up at the door waiting to go. And
oh, yeah.
you and I were among them, and that's because you felt that was what's necessary to do. And I'm proud of it.
Well, you should be. The lifestyle that we've had, we created a place where we could have a family and live a good life, and you've just about accomplished the whole ball of wax, and now you're living in one of the, if you could stick a pin in the world, you couldn't find a better place to put it than Indian Wells.
I don't think so.
It's beautiful down there, and beautiful homes, and good golf courses.
Mm-hmm.
All you gotta do now is take care of yourself.
Right.
Keep that old heart pumping and
There you go.
swinging that golf club.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Looking forward to it.
Well, great. Well, I'll bring this little tape to an end here, and I know that your family will enjoy it, and your country will have a good, clean record of your whole experience from the time you were born until today.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Oh.